The sunlight filtered weakly through the massive, mutated canopy above, casting an eerie green glow across the forest floor. The humid air hung heavy with the acrid scent of strange pollen and the unmistakable smell of decaying flesh. This was Earth after the verdant shift, a world reclaimed not by nature as it once was, but by something far more sinister. Alan Carter moved silently through the undergrowth, her steps carefully placed to avoid disturbing the sleeping vegetation. Her weathered tactical vest was laden with essential tools: a machete, makeshift flamethrower, canteen, and the precious device that had led her here, a weather-beaten tablet displaying faint mapping signals. 6 years since the catastrophe, and she still hadn't grown accustomed to the constant alertness required to survive in this new world. The forest breathed around her, literally breathed. Pulsating movements rippled through the ground with disturbing regularity, like the slow inhale and exhale of a massive, slumbering beast. Plant life that had once been passive now hunted with terrifying efficiency. Evolution accelerated to nightmarish proportions after the gene-altering catastrophe that scientists had arrogantly named ecological restoration. Alan checked her tablet again. The seed vault should be within 5 kilometers of her position. Seeds untouched by mutation, perhaps even technology to reverse the changes, a treasure worth risking everything for. Her community needed this desperately. The protective walls of their compound wouldn't hold forever against the encroaching vegetation. Almost there, she whispered to herself, a habit formed during years of solitude. Just hold on a little longer. She paused at a small clearing, checking the route ahead. The path narrowed between 2 massive tree trunks that oozed a viscous amber fluid. Something didn't feel right. The forest had grown too quiet. Even the usual chittering of mutated insects had fallen silent. Instinct saved her life. Alan lunged forward just as a slender, reddish vine whipped through the air where her ankle had been a split second before. The siren vine, one of the deadliest plant mutations, had nearly caught her. Known for their ability to emit sound frequencies that disoriented prey, these vines were ambush predators of frightening intelligence. But Alan had acted too late. As she scrambled forward, another vine snapped around her wrist, its surface covered with tiny barbs that immediately broke skin. Pain shot up her arm as a third vine coiled around her ankle, pulling her off balance. "No," she hissed, slashing desperately with her free hand toward the machete strapped to her hip. The serrated edge of the vine dug deeper, drawing blood that the plant absorbed with unsettling efficiency. Alan felt the telltale lightheadedness that came with the vine's secretions entering her bloodstream. It wasn't just taking her blood, it was drugging her, preparing her body for slow consumption. More vines descended from the canopy, whipping toward her with unnatural precision. One struck her across the face, leaving a burning welt. The ground beneath her shifted as roots began to rise, forming a cradle-like depression that would become her grave. Her fingers found the machete handle, but her strength was already fading. The vines were emitting their disorienting hum, a sound just below conscious hearing that made her thoughts scatter like startled birds. Colors blurred, her heartbeat became erratic, and panic rose in her chest. Survival had taught Alan to fight silently. Noise attracted predators, but desperation overrode training. As the vines wrapped around her torso, constricting her breathing, she abandoned stealth. "Help!" she screamed, voice cracking from months of disuse. "Please, anyone!" Her cry echoed through the deadly silence of the forest, a sound so human and vulnerable that it seemed obscene in this twisted wilderness. No one would hear. No one would come. The few humans left were either in orbital stations or hidden in fortified enclaves many kilometers away. Her scream was just another dying sound in a world full of them. As her consciousness began to fade, Alan thought she heard movement, different from the slithering of vines. Heavier, purposeful, human, impossible. The drugs in her system must be causing hallucinations as a final cruelty. Then came the sound of blades slicing through dense vegetation, followed by the shriek of injured vines, a high-pitched whine that hurt her ears. The pressure around her chest suddenly released. Fresh pain flooded back as barbs were ripped from her skin, but with it came precious air. Through blurry vision, Alan saw a figure moving with astonishing speed around her. Tall, wielding what appeared to be a crude machete with practiced precision. Each strike severed vines that recoiled like wounded snakes. The figure darted between attacks, somehow anticipating the vine's movements. "Can you move?" A male voice, hoarse, but unmistakably human, cut through her daze. Alan forced her limbs to respond, rolling away from the depression that had nearly become her grave. Her rescuer continued his lethal dance, slicing through the primary stem of a vine cluster that controlled the others. A viscous green fluid sprayed from the wound, hissing when it hit the ground. "Now, run!" The stranger grabbed her upper arm, hauling her to her feet with surprising strength. Together they fled, crashing through underbrush with none of the caution Alan normally employed. Behind them, the injured siren vines emitted their haunting call, a sound that would attract every predatory plant within a kilometer. Her mysterious savior led her through the forest with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with its dangers. They ducked under hanging tendrils, skirted patches of ground that pulsated too rhythmically, and finally reached a narrow ravine cut into ancient concrete, remnants of the old world. The man pulled her into a gap barely visible between fallen debris, revealing a small chamber that might once have been part of a drainage system. Now it served as a temporary sanctuary, its concrete walls inhospitable to the hungry vegetation outside. "That was close," he said, finally releasing her arm and securing a makeshift door of metal scraps across the entrance. "Those vines nearly had you." Alan collapsed against the wall, her breath coming in painful gasps as the vine's toxins worked through her system. Now that they were relatively safe, she could finally see her rescuer clearly in the dim light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. He was tall and lean. Survival didn't allow for excess weight. With dark hair tied back pragmatically, his face was weathered by sun and strain, yet he couldn't be much older than 30. Multiple scars marked his exposed skin, telling stories of narrow escapes. His clothing was practical, reinforced in vulnerable areas, much like her own. But most striking was his equipment. His blade wasn't crude as she'd first thought, but expertly crafted from what appeared to be high-grade materials. "Who are you?" Ala managed, her voice raw. Her hand stayed close to her own weapon, wary despite his intervention. 6 years of survival had taught her that human threats could be as deadly as mutated ones. "Caden Wolf," he replied, keeping a respectful distance as he checked the security of their hideout. "You're lucky I was close enough to hear you. Usually, screaming like that just attracts more predators." "I know," she snapped, embarrassed by her lapse. "I don't make a habit of it. First time encountering siren vines?" "No, but they've evolved. These ones hunted differently than the variants I've seen before." She winced as she examined the puncture wounds on her wrist and ankle. The bleeding had slowed, but infection was always a concern. Caden reached into his pack and produced a small container. "Here, it's an antiseptic paste. Works against most of the toxins these plants produce." Alan hesitated before accepting his offering. Trust was a luxury few could afford these days. "If I wanted to hurt you, I could have just left you to the vines," he said matter-of-factly, reading her reluctance. She took the container. "Thank you for the paste and for coming when you did." As she applied the cooling substance to her wounds, Alan studied him more carefully. His equipment was too sophisticated for someone surviving alone in the wilds. The quality of his clothing, the specialized weapons, these weren't scavenged items. "You're not from around here," she stated rather than asked. "Orbital Station? Or one of the fortified enclaves?" Caden's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Does it matter? It might. Depends on why you're out here alone, so far from safety." She finished treating her wounds and returned the container. Most people with access to places like that don't choose to wander through man-eating forests. "Maybe I have my reasons." He turned away, checking their surroundings through a small gap in the barricade. We should rest here until nightfall. The siren vines are less active in darkness. They rely heavily on photosynthesis for quick movement. Alan knew he was deflecting, but decided not to push. For now, their goals aligned: survive the night. Questions could wait. As dusk fell, the forest transformed. Bioluminescent fungi began to glow along the ravine walls, casting an ethereal blue light over their shelter. The distant cries of nocturnal predators echoed through the concrete, reminders that darkness brought its own dangers. Caden shared his rations without comment, dried protein that tasted better than anything Alan had eaten in weeks. After they'd eaten in silence, he finally spoke. "You're tracking something?" he said. "Not a question. Your movements were too purposeful for random scavenging." Alan considered lying, but saw little point. A seed vault, pre-shift seeds, and possibly genetic restoration technology. According to old records, it should be in this region. She expected skepticism or perhaps laughter. Most survivors had given up hope of reversing the Verdant shift. Adaptation was the focus now, finding ways to coexist with a new ecosystem, however hostile. Instead, Caden's expression intensified with interest. Corvus Labs backup facility? The name sent a chill through her. Corvus Labs, the research consortium widely believed responsible for the Verdant shift, though the truth had been buried along with most of civilization. "You know about it?" she asked carefully. "I've been looking for it too." He hesitated, then reached into his pack and withdrew a small device, more advanced than her tablet. "I have more detailed coordinates, but the area is heavily overgrown. One person couldn't make it through alone." Understanding dawned on Alan. "Is that why you saved me? You need help accessing the vault." "I saved you because you needed saving," he replied sharply. "But yes, reaching the vault would be easier with two people." Alan leaned back against the concrete wall, considering her options. Alliance with a stranger was dangerous, but so was continuing alone. And if he already had better maps? "What's your interest in the vault?" she asked. "Most people just want to survive. They're not looking to fix what happened." Something dark flickered across Caden's face. "Maybe I'm not most people. That's not an answer. It's all you're getting tonight." He checked the makeshift barricade again. "We should take turns keeping watch. I'll go first. You need to let that antitoxin work through your system." Alan wanted to argue, but exhaustion and the lingering effects of the vine's poison made her eyelids heavy. As much as she distrusted falling asleep near a stranger, her body gave her little choice. "Wake me in 4 hours," she murmured, positioning herself so her back was against solid concrete, her hand never far from her weapon. The last thing she saw before drifting into fitful sleep was Caden's silhouette against the bioluminescent glow, a solitary figure standing guard between her and the horrors outside. Morning brought a thin, filtered light and the sounds of the forest awakening. Alan opened her eyes to find Caden examining her tablet. "Sleep well?" he asked without looking up. She sat up quickly, annoyed that he'd managed to take her device without waking her. "You should have woken me for my watch. You needed to rest more than I needed sleep." He handed back the tablet. "Your map is incomplete. The vault entrance isn't where you think. It's been relocated after a landslide 3 years ago. And you know this how?" Caden met her gaze evenly. "Because I was there when it happened." The revelation hung between them in the stale air of their concrete shelter. Alan processed this information, fitting it with her earlier observations about his equipment. "You worked for Corvus," she said finally, the words landing like stones. "Yes." He didn't flinch from her accusing tone. "I was part of a research team stationed near the vault. When the shift accelerated beyond containment, most personnel evacuated to orbital stations. I stayed." "Why?" "Guilt." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Everyone had lost someone to the Verdant shift. Alan had watched her entire family consumed by the first wave of mutations. Plants that had once been harmless transforming into voracious predators overnight. Partly, he admitted, but also because running away doesn't fix anything. The solutions, if they exist, are down here, not up there. He gestured vaguely toward the sky, where humanity's remnants orbited safely above the green hell Earth had become. Corvus created this nightmare, Alan said, her voice tight with old anger. Your people thought they could control evolution, accelerate adaptation to climate change. Instead, you unleashed this. She waved at the world beyond their shelter. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Caden replied quietly. The initial tests were successful, plants with enhanced growth rates but control behaviors. Then something changed, a variable we didn't account for. By the time we realized the mutations were self-propagating, it was too late. Too late for billions of people. Alan stood, needing distance from him despite the confined space. Too late for my family. I watched vines like those yesterday tear through my home. My sister was only 12. The pain of the memory was still fresh even after 6 years. She'd been the only survivor from her neighborhood, saved by pure chance. She'd been exploring an old storm drain when the plants attacked, much like the concrete shelter they now occupied. I'm sorry, Caden said simply. More than you can know. That's why I'm here, why I've spent years mapping safe paths through the worst areas. The vault contains original seed samples, but more importantly, it has prototype technology that could potentially reverse the genetic drift, restore plants to their pre-shift state. Alan wanted to cling to her anger, but surviving the apocalypse had taught her pragmatism above all. And you need my help to reach it? We need each other's help, he corrected. I know the location and what we're looking for. You clearly know how to navigate this territory. You've survived out here longer than most could. She considered his words. Partnership with someone connected to Corvus went against everything she believed for years. But if what he said about the vault was true, my community is counting on me, she said finally. 37 people, hidden in the ruins of an old water treatment plant. We've held out for years, but the plants are advancing. The barriers won't hold much longer. Caden nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility she carried. The vault might be their only hope, everyone's only hope. But we need to move soon. The longer we wait, the more dangerous the journey becomes. How far? 2 days' journey with good conditions. Potentially longer if we encounter heavy resistance. Alan made her decision. If you betray me, I'll feed you to the vines myself. A ghost of a smile crossed Caden's face. Fair enough. They emerged from the shelter cautiously, into a world transformed by daylight. The ravine walls dripped with morning condensation, feeding the hungry moss that carpeted every surface. In the distance, massive flower pods the size of cars slowly opened their petals, revealing fawn-like structures designed to trap unwary creatures. Caden took point, his machete ready as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Alan followed closely, her senses alert for the slightest movement. They moved in near silence, communicating with hand signals when necessary. By midday, the landscape had changed dramatically. The forest grew denser, the canopy nearly blotting out the sun entirely. Massive fungal growths formed bridges between trees, their surfaces glistening with toxic secretions. The ground pulsated more vigorously here, as if the heart of the forest beat closer to the surface. The plants are more interconnected in this region, Caden explained in a hushed tone as they paused to consult his device. They share information. If one detects prey, others respond. Like a nervous system, Alan observed. We've noticed similar patterns. Cut one vine, another kilometers away reacts. Exactly. The shift didn't just make them predatory, it made them communal. Almost like a distinctive clicking sound interrupted him. Both froze, hands moving to weapons. Mantis cats, Alan whispered, recognizing the sound. These predators, feline bodies grotesquely melded with insect characteristics, hunted in packs, and had adapted perfectly to the new ecosystem. They're close. Caden's expression tightened. We need higher ground. They rarely climb. They changed course, heading toward a partially collapsed structure visible through the trees, perhaps once an observation tower or transmission station. The clicking grew louder, accompanied by the soft pad of feet on moss-covered ground. They reached the structure just as the first mantis cat, emerged from the underbrush. The creature stood as tall as Alan's waist, its sleek feline body supported by 6 jointed legs ending in hook-like claws. Where a normal cat's head would be, a mantis-like structure swiveled independently, compound eyes glinting with predatory intelligence. Behind it, 5 more creatures appeared, spreading out in a hunting formation. Up, now, Caden urged, boosting Alan toward a metal ladder fused to the structure's side. She climbed quickly, wincing as her injured wrist protested the strain. Below, Caden followed, just as the lead mantis cat lunged. His boot connected with its head, sending it tumbling back with an angry screech. The others converged, but Caden was already beyond their reach, ascending the ladder with practiced efficiency. They reached a platform 10 meters above ground level, just as the pack circled the tower's base. The creatures prowled restlessly, occasionally rearing up to test the structure's stability with their front legs. They're persistent, Caden noted grimly. Might be stuck here a while. Alan surveyed their surroundings from the elevated position. There, she pointed toward a dense patch of foliage about half a kilometer away. That's not natural growth. Too symmetrical. Caden followed her gaze, then checked his device. You're right. That could be the emergency air shaft for the underground portion of the facility. Good eye. How do we get there with them following? She nodded toward the mantis cats below. We wait, he replied pragmatically. They'll lose interest eventually. Patience keeps you alive out here. As they settled in for a long wait, Alan studied him surreptitiously. Despite his connection to Corvus, his survival skills were undeniable. He moved through the forest with the same careful awareness she developed over years of necessity. How long have you been searching for the vault? She asked finally. Caden was quiet for a moment. 3 years actively searching. Before that, I was just surviving, trying to make sense of what we'd done. He met her eyes. I was part of the gene editing team. Not leadership, just a researcher specializing in accelerated adaptation patterns. We thought we were saving the world from climate collapse, creating plants that could rapidly adapt to changing conditions, produce oxygen more efficiently, sequester carbon faster. Playing God, Alan couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Yes, he admitted simply, with the best intentions and the worst results. When the first mutations appeared, management insisted they were isolated incidents. When they became impossible to ignore, we were told to continue work on containment protocols rather than warning the public. His hands tightened on the railing. By the time some of us realized what was happening and tried to sound the alarm, the shift had begun. Plant life worldwide started changing almost simultaneously, faster than anyone predicted. How did you survive the initial outbreak? Our facility had containment protocols, barriers designed to keep experimental specimens in, but they worked equally well keeping hostile vegetation out. For a while, his expression darkened. When evacuation orders came, there was limited space on the transports to orbital stations. Priority went to senior staff and their families. But not you. I gave up my place, he said quietly, to a colleague's daughter. Then I stayed to download what research I could that might help find solution. I thought I deserved to face what we'd created. The admission hung between them. Alan wanted to hate him for his role in the catastrophe, but his actions since spoke of genuine remorse. Redemption was a luxury few could afford in this new world, yet he seemed determined to find it. The vault, she said after a long silence. What exactly does it contain? You mentioned technology that could reverse the mutations. Caden nodded cautiously. Experimental gene editing tools designed to target and deactivate specific genetic sequences. Originally created to serve as a failsafe if our engineered plants spread beyond test areas. A bitter laugh escaped him. Too little, too late, as it turned out. But the principles are sound. With the original unaltered seed samples also stored there, we could potentially develop a counteragent, something that could be released into the ecosystem to gradually revert the most dangerous mutations. Not a complete solution, Alan observed. No, he agreed. The world will never be what it was, but it could be made survivable again. Plants that don't actively hunt humans would be a start. Below them, the mantis cats had settled into watchful waiting, their compound eyes never leaving the tower. Hours passed in uneasy vigil as daylight gradually faded. When darkness finally fell, the predators slipped away one by one, drawn to easier prey elsewhere. "We move at first light," Caden decided after checking his device. "The air shaft I mentioned, it's our best entry point. Less exposed than the main entrance." Alan nodded agreement, stretching her stiff muscles. The platform offered little comfort, but it was safer than the ground. They would rest in shifts, as they had in the concrete shelter. "I'll take first watch," she offered, knowing sleep would elude her anyway. Too many thoughts churned in her mind. About Caden, about the vault, about the possibility, however remote, of a world where plants didn't eat people. Caden settled against the support beam, machete close at hand. "Wake me if anything changes," he instructed before closing his eyes. Alan watched him slip into the light sleep of someone accustomed to danger. Never fully unconscious, always ready to snap awake at the first sign of threat. Despite everything, she found herself trusting him, at least enough to believe their goals aligned. As night deepened, the forest below transformed once again. Bioluminescent fungi cast eerie blue light across the landscape. Massive flowers opened their petals to the darkness, releasing spores that drifted on night breezes like glowing snow. Beautiful and deadly, Earth's new normal. Alan thought of her community, of the children born after the shift who had never known a world where nature wasn't the enemy. What would it mean to them if Caden's solution worked? A world where they could walk beneath trees without fear of being devoured? It seemed an impossible dream. Yet for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Morning arrived with an oppressive humidity that clung to their skin like a second layer. The forest floor was shrouded in mist that swirled and eddied with unsettling purpose, almost as if it were alive. Perhaps it was. They descended from their shelter cautiously, weapons ready. The mantis cats had indeed moved on, leaving only tracks in the soft ground as evidence of their vigil. "The air shaft should be about half a kilometer east," Caden said, consulting his device. "Relatively direct path, but we'll need to cross a clearing I'd rather avoid." "Why?" Alan asked, checking her own tablet to synchronize their information. "Spore field. The fungi release hallucinogenic compounds when disturbed. Makes for difficult navigation." Alan nodded grimly. She'd encountered similar hazards before. Survivors wandering in circles, caught in hallucinations until dehydration or predators found them. They set off through the dense undergrowth, moving with the cautious efficiency of experienced survivors. The foliage grew increasingly strange as they approached their destination. Plants with geometric patterns that seemed almost artificial, leaves arranged with mathematical precision. "We're getting close," Caden whispered. These were early test specimens. The mutations are more controlled here. The clearing he'd mentioned appeared ahead. A perfect circle of bare soil, surrounded by towering mushrooms with caps the size of satellite dishes. Their surfaces glistened with moisture, tiny droplets catching the filtered sunlight. "We need to circle around," Alan suggested, eyeing the fungi warily. "Too much time. The vault entrance is just beyond." Caden produced 2 crude masks from his pack. "These will filter the worst of it. We'll move fast, straight line, don't stop for anything." Alan accepted the mask, securing it over her nose and mouth. It smelled of some chemical compound, probably designed to neutralize the spore's effects. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, gripping her machete tightly. They entered the clearing at a steady jog, feet disturbing the soil as little as possible. Immediately, the mushrooms responded to their presence, cap edges fluttering as though in a breeze. Tiny puffs of iridescent spores released into the air around them. Despite the masks, Alan felt the effects almost immediately. Colors intensified, sounds distorted. The ground beneath her feet seemed to ripple like water. She focused on Caden's back ahead of her, using him as an anchor point for reality. They were halfway across when disaster struck. A massive tremor shook the ground. not unusual in the post-shift world where root systems constantly reshape terrain. But its timing couldn't have been worse. Caden stumbled, his hand instinctively bracing against one of the mushroom stalks to prevent falling. The fungus reacted violently, its entire cap splitting open to release a dense cloud of spores directly into his face. His mask, dislodged by the fall, hung uselessly around his neck. Caden! Alan rushed to him as he staggered, eyes unfocused. Keep moving, he managed, voice slurred. Almost. There. She grabbed his arm, supporting his increasingly unsteady weight as they pushed forward. The opposite side of the clearing was just meters away, but Caden's condition deteriorated rapidly. His eyes darted wildly, tracking things only he could see. His breathing became rapid and shallow. They're all around us, he muttered, swinging his machete at phantoms. Can't you see them? The vines. They're my skin. It's not real, Alan insisted, struggling to keep him moving in a straight line. Focus on my voice. We're almost through. They stumbled from the clearing into dense vegetation beyond, but Caden's hallucinations had taken firm hold. He thrashed against her support, eyes wild with terror at invisible threats. Need to get you somewhere safe, Alan muttered, scanning their surroundings. A fallen tree created a small hollow beneath its massive root system. Not ideal, but defensible enough until the worst effects passed. She half-dragged Caden to the shelter, fighting his resistance the entire way. Once inside, she forced him to sit with his back against solid wood, hoping the physical connection to something real might help ground him. The lab, he gasped between ragged breaths. It's my fault. All those people. I helped create the formula. My research. Caden, listen to me. Alan gripped his shoulders firmly. It's the spores talking. You need to focus. But he was too far gone, lost in a nightmare of his own making. Or perhaps lost in truth his conscious mind usually suppressed. His confessions spilled out between moments of panic. Details of his work, the warnings ignored, the ethical corners cut in pursuit of solutions to environmental collapse. We knew. The risk, he rambled, eyes unfocused. Cross-species genetic transfer. Unpredictable, but management pushed for results. Cheaper than evacuating coastal cities. Cheaper than rebuilding. Just change the plants instead. Alan listened with growing horror as the scope of Corvus Labs' hubris became clear. They hadn't just been developing adaptive plants. They'd been incorporating insect and animal DNA to create entirely new life forms. The verdant shift wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable result of scientific arrogance unchecked by ethical constraints. Hours passed as she kept watch over Caden's deteriorating mental state. The spores were particularly potent, designed perhaps to protect the area around the vault from intruders. Gradually, his rambling subsided into exhausted mumbling, then finally into unconsciousness. Alan used the time to scout their immediate surroundings, never straying far from the hollow. The structure Caden had identified as an air shaft was visible now, a concrete protrusion largely consumed by vegetation, but with clear, artificial origins. When she returned, Caden was awake, his eyes clearer though haunted. "How much did I say?" he asked hoarsely. "Enough," she replied, offering her canteen. Corvus wasn't just developing adaptive plants. You were creating hybrids, plants with animal characteristics. He drank deeply before responding. Yes, the idea was to incorporate beneficial traits. Insect resistance to radiation, reptilian adaptability to temperature. Plants that could survive in conditions that would kill natural species. He looked away. It worked too well. And the vault? Is what you told me true? Can it really help reverse this? Yes, he said firmly. The vault contains pure samples and the original CRISPR templates. With those, we could develop targeted gene therapies that would terminate the most aggressive mutations. He shakily got to his feet. We need to keep moving. That air shaft is our way in. Are you sure you're recovered enough? No, he admitted with a weak smile. But we don't have time to wait for perfect conditions. The sky above had darkened ominously during his recovery, not with normal clouds, but with a rolling mass of spores and pollen. The distinctive green tinge meant only one thing. Spore storm, Alan noted grimly. We need to get underground before it hits. Spore storms were among the deadliest post-shift phenomena. Massive clouds of concentrated reproductive materials from multiple plant species, carried by winds and capable of causing severe respiratory distress, skin burns, and worse. Without proper shelter, exposure could be fatal. They abandoned caution, moving quickly toward the concrete structure. As they approached, the true scale became apparent. What had appeared relatively small was actually the top of a much larger installation, most of which had been swallowed by earth and aggressive vegetation. A heavy metal hatch capped the air shaft, its surface corroded but intact. Massive vines had grown around it, forming a natural barricade that would require significant effort to clear. Those aren't ordinary vines, Caden warned as they approached. They're siren vines like the ones that attacked you, but more developed. This particular strain was designed to guard sensitive installations. Your people created them deliberately? Alan couldn't keep the disgust from her voice. Security through biology, he replied grimly. Less conspicuous than armed guards, harder to defeat than electronic systems. We never imagined they'd become what they are now. The first drops of the storm began to fall around them. Not water, but thick, viscous fluid carrying spores that sizzled faintly where they landed. Time was running out. We need to clear those vines, Alan said, assessing the situation. Cutting won't be fast enough. Caden reached into his pack, producing a small, torch-like device. I've been saving this. It generates an intense, focused heat. Not quite a laser, but similar principle. The vines are highly susceptible to thermal shock. You're sure it won't trigger them to attack? No, he admitted, but we're out of options. The storm intensified, droplets falling more frequently around them. Each one that touched exposed skin left an angry red welt. They pulled protective hoods over their heads, but the covering would only delay the inevitable without proper shelter. Caden activated the device, which emitted a narrow beam of intense blue-white light. When he directed it at the vines guarding the hatch, the effect was immediate. The plant tissue blackened and curled away, releasing a foul-smelling smoke. For a moment, it seemed to be working perfectly. Then, as if responding to an unheard command, the entire mass of vines suddenly convulsed. Those not directly damaged by the heat whipped toward them with terrifying speed. They're coordinating, Alan shouted, slashing at a vine that nearly caught her throat. The whole colony is responding. Caden didn't waste breath replying, focusing his device on the vines directly blocking the hatch. Alan defended him, her machete slicing through tendrils that reached for them with increasing desperation. The storm grew heavier, each droplet that penetrated their protective, clothing burning like acid. Almost there, Caden shouted over the hissing of burned vegetation. The main cluster guarding the hatch had retreated, leaving the metal surface exposed. A massive vine, thicker than Alan's arm, suddenly erupted from beneath the soil at their feet. It coiled around Caden's leg with crushing force, yanking him off balance. The heat device flew from his hand, skittering across the ground beyond reach. Caden! Alan lunged forward, hacking at the vine with frantic precision. Her blade cut deep, but not completely through. The vine's outer layer had toughened in response to their attack, adapting in real time. Caden struggled to reach the knife at his belt as more vines emerged, sensing vulnerable prey. One wrapped around his torso, constricting his breathing. Another seized his right arm, barbs digging through his protective clothing into flesh. Alan abandoned her attack on the first vine, targeting instead the central node where multiple tendrils joined, a lesson learned from observing the plant's behavior over years. Her blade found the vulnerable junction, severing the connection. The vines spasmed, their movements becoming uncoordinated without the control center. Caden gasped for air as the pressure around his chest eased. The hatch! We need to get open now. Together, they stumbled to the metal door, the storm now a deluge around them. Caustic droplets burned through their protective layers, raising blisters on exposed skin. Caden grasped the wheel mechanism that sealed the hatch, straining against years of corrosion and disuse. It stuck, he grunted, muscles straining. Alan joined him, adding her strength to his. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a shriek of protesting metal, the wheel turned. Half a rotation, then a full one. The hatch mechanism unlocked with an audible clank. They heaved it open just as a new wave of vines surged toward them. These ones covered in what appear to be eyes. Sensory organs evolved to track prey with terrible efficiency. Alan slipped through the opening first, then helped pull Caden through as tentacles grasped at his legs. They slammed the hatch shut from below, cutting off a vine that had nearly made it through. Green fluid splattered across the metal floor as the severed piece thrashed independently for several seconds before falling still. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the thin beam of Caden's emergency light. They stood at the top of a vertical shaft with metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall, descending into blackness below. "How deep does it go?" Alan asked, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. 20 meters to the main level, Caden replied, examining the walls with his light. The facility is largely underground, safer from detection and environmental extremes. They began their descent, the sounds of the storm and the thwarting vines growing distant above them. The air grew cooler, carrying a metallic tang that reminded Alan of the old world, of buildings and technology rather than predatory vegetation. At the bottom of the shaft, a circular tunnel led deeper into the facility. Unlike the world above, here the corruption of nature had only partially taken hold. Thin vines grew along wall seams, and patches of luminescent fungus provided intermittent ghostly light, but the structure remained largely intact. The auxiliary power systems might still be functional, Caden said, examining a control panel on the wall. They were designed to last decades without maintenance. He pried open the panel cover, revealing a complex array of switches and indicators. Most showed no signs of life, but a few still glowed faintly. After a moment's consideration, he flipped several switches in sequence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum that vibrated through the floor, emergency lighting flickered to life along the corridor. Dim red bulbs that cast more shadows than illumination, but infinitely better than darkness. "We're in luck," Caden said, though his expression remained grim. "Backup systems are operational, but minimal. Main power's long dead." "Where exactly are we going?" Alan asked, eyeing the branching corridors ahead. "Seed Vault is on sublevel 3. It's the most secure area, temperature-controlled, independent air filtration." He consulted his device, now displaying a schematic of the facility. This way, they moved cautiously through the dim corridors, passing abandoned workstations and laboratories. Everything bore signs of hasty evacuation. Personal items scattered, equipment left running until power finally failed. In one room, desiccated remains of what might have been early experimental plants still occupied growth chambers, their unnatural forms preserved in the controlled environment. "How many people worked here?" Alan asked, her voice hushed despite no obvious danger. "At peak, about 300 researchers, support staff, security." Caden paused before an elevator shaft, its doors forced partially open. After the shift accelerated, evacuation was ordered. I don't know how many made it out. They were forced to climb down the elevator shaft to reach the lower levels, the car itself long, inoperable. The physical exertion was almost welcome after the tension of their journey. Simple, straightforward challenges rather than the constant vigilance required above ground. Sublevel 3 greeted them with sealed doors bearing biohazard warnings and security notices. Unlike the levels above, this area showed few signs of nature's intrusion. The containment protocols had apparently held, at least partially. "The vault entrance should be at the end of this corridor," Caden said, consulting his schematic. "It has multiple security systems, but most should be inactive without main power." They approached a massive circular door reminiscent of bank vaults in the old world. A control panel beside it still showed active status lights. This deep underground, the critical systems had remained functional on backup power. "We need authorization," Alan observed, examining the retinal scanner and ID card reader. "I have it," Caden replied, producing a small device from an inner pocket of his vest. This contains archived security credentials. It won't be perfect, but it should override the basic systems. As he worked to bypass the security measures, Alan explored the adjacent laboratory. Unlike the abandoned spaces above, this one seemed to have been deliberately preserved. Equipment shut down methodically rather than abandoned in haste. Research notes were organized in sealed containers, protected from environmental degradation. One terminal remained in standby mode, its screen glowing faintly with the Corvus Labs logo. Curiosity overcoming caution, Alan touched the keyboard, bringing the system to life. Access restricted flashed across the screen, followed by a password prompt. On impulse, she called to Caden, "Try your device on this terminal. There might be information we need." He joined her, connecting his credential device to the terminal's input port. After several tense moments, the screen flickered and changed. Project Restoration Archives, restricted access. Emergency protocol active. "We're in," Caden said, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he navigated through the database. These are the research files related to the vault contents. Exactly what we need to understand what we're looking for. As he downloaded critical data to his device, Alan continued examining the laboratory. In a sealed cabinet marked prototype, she discovered what appeared to be delivery mechanisms. Aerosol dispersal systems designed for wide-area application of biological agents. "Is this how you plan to distribute the counteragent?" she asked, holding up one of the smaller devices. Caden glanced up from the terminal. "Yes. The original plan was regional application via drone deployment, but we'll need to adapt. These handheld units could work for targeted areas. Proof of concept before attempting larger distribution." A heavy thud from the direction of the vault door interrupted them. Then another. Something was striking the metal with considerable force. "That's not a system malfunction," Alan said quietly, hand moving to her weapon. They approached the vault entrance cautiously. The security panel Caden had been working on now displayed error messages across its screen. Another impact shook the door, strong enough to vibrate the floor beneath their feet. "Something's trying to get in," Caden whispered unnecessarily. "But what? Nothing should be alive down here." As if in answer, a seam appeared along the edge of the vault door. Not from it opening properly, but from something physically forcing it apart. Green tendrils slithered through the gap, probing the air like serpents tasting for prey. "Siren vines," Alan hissed. "But how?" The air shaft was sealed. They must have another entry point, old damage to the structure, or maintenance tunnels we don't know about. Caden's expression hardened. They've been trying to reach the vault for years. They can sense the original seeds somehow. The pure genetic material is a threat to them. The vines worked with disturbing intelligence, pulling at the edges of the door, widening the gap incrementally. Unlike their surface cousins, these specimens had evolved in darkness. Their coloration pale, almost translucent, but their strength undiminished. "We need to get into the vault now," Alan urged, before they forced their way in completely. Caden returned to the security panel, working with desperate speed. "I'm bypassing final security protocols, forcing emergency access." The vines continued their assault on the door, the gap widening enough to reveal what lay beyond. Not just tendrils, but an entire mass of pale, pulsating vegetation that had consumed whatever lay on the other side of the vault. Eyes dotted the surface of larger vines, swiveling to focus on the humans with predatory intent. "Caden!" Alan's voice rose with urgency as she slashed at a vine that had worked its way far enough through to reach for them. "Almost got it!" The control panel emitted a series of tones, and with a pneumatic hiss, the secondary door, previously hidden in the wall adjacent to the compromised vault entrance, slid open. "Emergency access route. Go!" They dashed through the opening just as the main vault door gave way with a tortured screech of metal. The mass of vines surged forward, but the emergency door sealed automatically behind them, cutting off the immediate threat. They found themselves in a small antechamber with another security door ahead. This one opened without resistance, responding to Caden's credentials. Beyond lay the seed vault itself, A vast, climate-controlled chamber filled with row upon row of storage units, each containing thousands of samples. We made it, Alan breathed, taking in the scale of the repository. But those vines will find a way through eventually. Then we work quickly, Caden replied, moving purposefully to a central control station. The seeds are only part of what we need. The gene editing technology is in a separate compartment. The control station activated under his touch, displaying a directory of the vault's contents. While Caden searched for the specific technology they needed, Alan examined the seed storage units. Each drawer was meticulously labeled with species information, region of origin, and genetic markers. These are all pure strains, she realized, completely uncontaminated by the shift mutations. The foundation for rebuilding, Caden confirmed without looking up, but useless without a way to clear space for them to grow. That's what this is for. He indicated a sealed container that had risen from a compartment beneath the floor at his command. Inside, visible through a small viewing window, was a series of vials containing clear liquid, alongside what appeared to be highly sophisticated laboratory equipment miniaturized for field use. CRISPR-Cas13 targeted RNA interference, he explained, carefully removing the container. It identifies specific RNA sequences unique to the mutated plants and destroys them without affecting normal cellular functions. In theory, it should revert the most dangerous mutations while leaving basic survival adaptations intact. In theory, Alan raised an eyebrow. It was still in final testing when the shift accelerated beyond control. Limited field trials showed promise, but he hesitated. There were concerns about unintended consequences. Some ecosystems are so thoroughly transformed that sudden reversion could cause collapse. A heavy impact against the emergency door interrupted them. The vines had found them again. We need to select what we're taking and find another way out, Alan urged. This facility must have multiple exit points. Caden nodded, consulting his schematic. There's a maintenance tunnel that leads to a secondary access shaft about half a kilometer from where we entered. If it's still intact, it could get us clear of this immediate area. Working quickly, they gathered the essential components. The gene editing technology, selected seed samples prioritizing staple food crops and plants critical for ecosystem stabilization, and the distribution devices Alan had discovered earlier. Everything fit into their packs, though the weight was considerable. The pounding at the emergency door intensified, the metal beginning to buckle under repeated impacts. Whatever had evolved in the darkness of the compromised sections of the facility had grown powerful indeed. Time to go, Caden said grimly, leading the way to a maintenance access panel at the back of the vault. It opened onto a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for them to traverse in single file. These tunnels run throughout the facility. They were designed for repair bots, not humans, so it'll be tight. They entered the cramped passage just as the emergency door gave way behind them, admitting a writhing mass of pale vines into the vault. The tendrils seemed to sense their departure, changing direction to pursue the humans through the narrow opening. The maintenance tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare. Tight corners, low ceilings, and minimal emergency lighting that flickered ominously. They crawled more than walked, their packs scraping against the sides of the passage. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit never faded. The vines moved with disturbing speed through the confined space. "They're gaining on us," Alan gasped, her muscles burning from the awkward movement. "Access shaft should be just ahead," Caden replied, his voice strained. "Once we're in the vertical section, we can move faster." The tunnel abruptly opened into a wider junction where several maintenance passages converged. In the center was a vertical shaft similar to the one they descended earlier, with metal rungs leading upward to what they hoped was freedom. As Caden reached for the first rung, a pale tendril whipped around his ankle, yanking him backward with shocking force. He crashed to the ground, the precious container with the gene-editing technology sliding across the floor. "Go," he shouted at Alan. "Take it and go." Instead, she lunged for the fallen container, securing it in her pack before turning to help Caden. More vines had emerged from the tunnel, wrapping around his legs, dragging him inexorably back toward the writhing mass advancing from the passage. Alan drew her machete, slashing at the tendrils with desperate precision. The vines seemed to anticipate her attacks, recoiling from the blade only to strike from another angle. One caught her across the face, leaving a burning welt from temple to chin. Caden had managed to draw his own blade, sawing at the vines that held him. Together, they fought the relentless vegetation, retreating step by step toward the vertical shaft. The vines pressed their advantage, more emerging with each passing second. "We can't fight them all," Caden gasped, blood seeping from multiple puncture wounds where barbs had penetrated his clothing. Alan's gaze fell on the portable flame device they'd used earlier, still attached to Caden's pack. "Give me the torch." He understood immediately, passing her the device. Alan activated it at maximum output, sweeping the intense beam across the advancing wall of vegetation. The effect was immediate. Vines recoiled, their pale surfaces blackening and curling under the heat. The confined space filled with acrid smoke as plant matter charred. "Now, up the shaft." She maintained the defensive barrier of heat as Caden began climbing the access ladder. The vines retreated temporarily, but she could see them reorganizing, adapting their approach to circumvent the heat source. Alan waited until Caden had ascended several meters before backing toward the ladder herself, the torch held before her like a shield. When she reached the first rung, she hooked the device to her belt, maintaining its protective beam as she began to climb. The vine surged forward as soon as she turned her back, sensing opportunity. A tendril wrapped around her pack, nearly pulling her from the ladder. She clung desperately to the metal rungs with one hand while the other fumbled for her machete. "Hold on," Caden called from above, reversing his climb to help her. "No, keep going," she shouted back. With a violent twist, she managed to free one arm from her pack strap, leaving it partially attached, but giving her enough mobility to draw her blade. A quick slice severed the vine holding her. The sudden release of tension sent her swinging against the shaft wall, her grip on the ladder nearly failing. Caden had ignored her command, descending to where she struggled. His strong hand grasped her arm, stabilizing her until she could secure her position again. Together, he insisted. They resumed climbing, the torch's beam growing weaker as its power source depleted. Below them, the vines had begun ascending the shaft walls themselves, no longer confined to the rungs. Like massive serpents, they wound their way upward in pursuit. After what seemed an eternity of burning muscles and desperate scrambling, they reached the top of the shaft. A final security door separated them from what their schematics indicated should be the surface. Unlike the main vault, this exit had been designed for emergency evacuation, its mechanism simpler, more reliable. Caden pressed his credential device against the reader. Long seconds passed as the ancient systems processed the authentication. The vines drew closer, now only meters below. With a hydraulic hiss, the door slid open, revealing not the stormy forest they'd left behind, but a narrow concrete tunnel sloping gently upward. They stumbled through the opening, Caden activating the emergency close sequence as they passed. The door slid shut just as the first tendrils reached the top of the shaft, cutting off a segment that continued to thrash on the floor beside them. "That won't hold them for long," Caden warned, examining the tunnel ahead. This access route was designed to emerge some distance from the main facility, provides evacuation options if the primary exit is compromised, or being attacked by carnivorous plants, Alan added grimly. They moved quickly along the passage, their progress hampered by exhaustion and the weight of their precious cargo. The tunnel gradually angled upward, the air growing warmer and more humid, signs they were approaching the surface. A final set of steps led to another hatch, this one manual rather than electronic. Together, they pushed against the mechanism, straining against years of disuse. With a groan of protesting metal, it finally gave way, swinging upward to reveal the forest once more. But unlike the storm-ravaged area they'd left behind, this location was eerily calm. The spore storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape glistening with residue that slowly dissolved the organic matter it touched. They emerged cautiously, sealing the hatch behind them and disguising it with debris from the forest floor. "Where are we?" Alan asked, consulting her tablet, but finding no familiar landmarks. Caden checked his device. "About 3 kilometers south of our entry point." The evacuation tunnel was designed to provide maximum separation from the main facility. The immediate area appeared less densely overgrown than what they'd encountered earlier. Perhaps the lingering effects of the spore storm had temporarily suppressed the most aggressive vegetation. However, the respite wouldn't last long. "We need to find shelter," Alan said, noting the position of the sun through the canopy. "Night will fall soon, and we're both injured." Caden nodded, wincing as he adjusted his pack. The vine attacks had left them both bloodied and exhausted. There should be a maintenance outpost near here, marked on the old facility maps. If it's still standing, it might provide temporary refuge. They set off through the forest, moving more slowly now that immediate danger had passed. Their wounds, combined with physical exhaustion and the weight of their salvaged treasures, made every step an effort. But beneath the pain and fatigue ran a current of cautious hope. For the first time in years, they carried something that might actually change the course of humanity's struggle against the mutated world. The maintenance outpost proved to be little more than a concrete bunker half buried in the hillside, its entrance concealed by aggressive creepers. Unlike the more sophisticated vegetation they'd encountered earlier, these plants appeared to be ordinary, if overgrown, specimens. Caden's heat device made short work of clearing the doorway, revealing a simple chamber with basic provisions long since expired, but solid walls and a roof that would keep them safe for the night. As dusk fell, they treated each other's wounds with what remained of their medical supplies. Alan winced as Caden applied antiseptic to the welt across her face. "It'll scar," he said apologetically. "Just another one," she replied with grim humor. Like everyone who'd survived the shift, her body bore the marks of countless encounters with the changed world. Once basic first aid was complete, they turned their attention to their precious cargo. The container with the gene-editing technology had survived intact, its internal cooling systems still functioning on independent power. Caden examined it carefully, ensuring nothing had been damaged in their escape. "Will it work?" Alan asked, watching him run diagnostic checks on the equipment. "The technology is sound," he replied cautiously, "but implementation will be challenging. We need to prioritize targets, focus on neutralizing the most aggressive mutations first. The siren vines, the spore-producing fungi, the mantis cats. And then what? Even if we can suppress those immediate threats, the entire world is transformed." Caden met her eyes. "Then we rebuild, one area at a time. Create safe zones where normal plants can grow again, where people can live without constant fear." He gestured to the seed samples they'd retrieved. "These aren't just for us, they're for generations to come." A starting point. Outside, darkness had fully descended, bringing with it the eerie bioluminescence that characterized the post-shift nights. Through a small observation slit in the bunker wall, blue-green light filtered in, casting ghostly patterns across the concrete floor. "Get some rest," Caden suggested. "I'll take first watch. Tomorrow we start the journey back to your community." Alan settled against the wall, her body craving sleep, but her mind racing with implications. "Do you really think we can fix any of this? Or are we just buying time?" Caden was silent for a long moment. "Maybe a bit of both," he admitted finally. "What Corvus unleashed, what I helped unleash, can't be completely undone. But life adapts. Humans most of all." He glanced at the container that represented humanity's best hope. "This isn't about returning to the old world. It's about making the new one livable." The honesty in his voice resonated with Alan. No false promises, no grandiose claims of salvation. Just the realistic hope of survival, of carving out spaces where humanity could do more than merely exist. "When I first heard your voice in the forest," she said softly, "I thought I was hallucinating. No one ventures that deep into vine territory alone." "I wasn't planning to," he replied with a small smile. "But plans change when you hear someone in trouble. Why did you really save me?" You could have let the vines take me, continued your mission alone. Caden turned to face her fully, his expression solemn in the dim light. Because after everything that's happened, all the death, all the struggle, I couldn't walk away from someone fighting to survive. Not when I had a hand in creating what they were fighting against. Redemption, she suggested. Maybe, he acknowledged, or just humanity. The same reason you're helping me now, despite knowing my connection to Corvus. Alan nodded slowly. He wasn't wrong. Her initial anger at discovering his role in the catastrophe had given way to understanding. Not forgiveness, exactly, but recognition of shared purpose. What mattered now wasn't assigning blame, but finding solutions. Get some sleep, Caden repeated gently. Tomorrow will be another hard day. Alan closed her eyes, surrendering to exhaustion. Her last conscious thought was of her community. The faces of children born after the shift who had never known a world where plants didn't hunt humans. Perhaps, with what they carried, that might change. Morning arrived with the filtered, sunlight characteristic of the altered world. Green-tinted rays struggling through the dense canopy. Alan woke to find Caden already checking their equipment, preparing for the journey ahead. How far to your community? He asked as she joined him. 2 days if we're lucky. Longer if we encounter obstacles. She studied the crude map they'd assembled from combining their data. We should skirt the vine territory we passed through earlier. They'll be alert to our presence now. Caden nodded agreement. The spore fields too. We need to conserve energy and avoid unnecessary risks. They secured their packs, distributed the weight of their precious cargo between them for better mobility, and prepared to leave the relative safety of the bunker. Before opening the door, Caden paused. When we reach your community, he said carefully, some will react to my Corvus connection the way you initially did. With anger, distrust. Probably, Alan agreed. But results speak louder than origins. If this technology works, she gestured to the container. It will, he assured her. But implementation takes time. I need you to help them understand that this isn't an immediate miracle. It's a process, gradual restoration, not instant transformation. She nodded, appreciating his honesty. False hope could be more dangerous than none at all. They emerged into the forest cautiously, alert for any sign of pursuit from the facility they'd raided. The area remained eerily quiet. The aftermath of the spore storm had temporarily suppressed much of the aggressive vegetation, creating an unnatural lull in the constant struggle for survival. They took advantage of the respite, covering significant distance before the forest began to show signs of returning to its normal state. By midday, familiar sounds had resumed. The clicking of unseen creatures, the subtle rustle of movement through undergrowth, the distant cries of airborne predators circling above the canopy. We're being watched, Alan noted quietly as they paused to consult their route. She'd felt eyes on them for the past hour. Not human, but something intelligent enough to track their movements with purpose. Caden nodded imperceptibly. Since we crossed the ridgeline. Men as cats, I think. Different pack from the ones we encountered earlier. They're hurting us, she realized. Notice how they've been steering us east? Away from the direct route to the community. Clever, Caden murmured. They've learned to manipulate human movement patterns. Force us in a less favorable terrain where they have the advantage. Decision time. Continue allowing themselves to be herded, potentially into a trap, or force a confrontation on their own terms. Neither option was attractive, but predictability meant death in this world. There's a rock formation about half a kilometer west, Alan suggested. Exposed granite outcrop. We'd have visibility and defensive position. Lead the way, Caden agreed. But be ready. They'll realize we've spotted them once we change direction. They altered course abruptly, cutting directly west through denser vegetation. Almost immediately, the forest around them reacted, subtle movements becoming more overt, the clicking communication of the mantis cats growing louder, more urgent. They're coordinating, Caden warned, machete ready as they increase their pace. Stay close. The first attack came from above. A mantis cat larger than any they'd seen before dropped from an overhanging branch, landing directly in their path. Unlike its surface-dwelling kin, this specimen had developed membranous gliding surfaces between its limbs, allowing limited aerial mobility. Without breaking stride, Alan fired her makeshift flamethrower, a quick burst that sent the creature scrambling sideways with an angry screech. They pressed forward, the rock formation now visible through the trees ahead. More shapes converged from the sides, a full hunting pack emerging from concealment. Their compound eyes glittered with predatory intelligence as they formed a loose semicircle, attempting to cut off the human's escape route. "Run!" Caden urged, severing a vine that had awakened to the commotion, seeking opportunistic prey. Together, they sprinted the final distance to the granite outcrop, scrambling up its weathered surface just as the pack closed in. From their elevated position, they could finally see the full extent of their pursuers. At least a dozen mantis cats, varying in size and coloration, but all displaying the characteristic melding of feline agility with insectoid features. The largest, clearly the pack leader, prowled at the base of the rocks, its mantis-like head swiveling to track their movements. "They're more organized than the ones I've encountered before," Alan observed, scanning for weakness in their formation. "And that leader, I've never seen one so large." Caden studied the creatures with scientific detachment despite their perilous situation. Accelerated evolution in action. Each generation adapts more perfectly to the post-shift environment. He pointed to distinctive markings on the leader's flanks. "Those are chemical signaling patches. They're using pheromones to coordinate complex hunting strategies." The pack began a methodical testing of the rock formation's perimeter, seeking accessible climbing routes. Several attempted to scale the smoother sections, their clawed limbs scraping against granite before sliding back. The leader, however, watched patiently, measuring, calculating. "They're looking for weakness," Alan said, "and they have time on their side. We need to break through their encirclement before dark." Nightfall would bring disadvantages they couldn't afford. The mantis cats had superior night vision, and other nocturnal predators would be drawn to the standoff. Worse, their route back to the community would take them through terrain virtually impassable in darkness. Caden surveyed their options. "We need a distraction, something to fragment their coordination temporarily." Alan considered their limited resources. The flamethrower had little fuel remaining, their physical weapons required close combat, and the precious cargo they carried couldn't be risked in direct confrontation. Her gaze fell on a peculiar growth at the edge of the clearing, a cluster of bulbous pods that seemed to throb with internal pressure. She recognized the species, pressure pods, colonists called them, notorious for explosive seed dispersal when triggered. "Those pods," she whispered, pointing discreetly. "If we could detonate them remotely." Caden followed her gaze, quickly understanding. The concussive force would disorient the cat's sensitive hearing organs, and the released spores would temporarily mask our scent. "But we need a trigger, something with enough force to rupture the pods from this distance." Caden searched their supplies, his expression brightening as he retrieved a compact item from a side pocket. Concentrated impact gel, originally designed for emergency excavation. He held up what looked like a small clay ball. "It's non-explosive, but generates substantial kinetic force on contact." "Will it reach from here?" "With proper trajectory." He studied the distance carefully. "I'll need to account for the gel's density and the air resistance." "While you calculate, I'll prepare our exit strategy," Alan said. "We'll need to move immediately after impact. Head northeast around that fallen tree, then double back to our original route once we've broken their formation." They worked quickly, aware that the pack leader had begun guiding several smaller members toward a potentially scalable section of the outcrop. Time was running short. "Ready," Caden announced, positioning himself for the throw. "On my mark, be prepared to run directly toward the largest concentration of cats. They won't expect us to charge them." Alan nodded, securing their packs for swift movement. "Count of 3. 1. The mantis cats sensed something changing, their movements becoming more agitated as they detected the humans' preparation for action. 2. The pack leader issued a high-pitched command, sending several members charging toward the rocks in anticipation of their prey's move. 3. Caden hurled the impact gel with precise calculation. It arced through the air, striking the center of the pressure pod cluster with perfect accuracy. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the pods ruptured in sequence, each detonation triggering the next in a chain reaction of concussive force. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A shockwave of air pressure rippled outward, followed by a dense cloud of spores that billowed across the clearing. The mantis cats nearest the explosion were thrown physically backward, while others recoiled in confusion as their sensory organs overloaded. Alan and Caden launched themselves from the rocks, sprinting directly through the disorganized pack. Several creatures snapped blindly in their direction, but the coordinated hunting formation had collapsed into chaos. They broke through the perimeter, racing toward the dense forest beyond. Behind them, the pack leader's furious screech cut through the confusion, attempting to rally its hunting party. But the spore cloud had done its work, masking the humans' scent trail and disorienting the predators long enough to gain critical distance. They ran until their lungs burned, changing direction repeatedly to confuse any pursuit. When they finally paused to catch their breath, the sounds of the mantis cats had faded to distant clicking, growing fainter as the pack lost their trail. That, Alan gasped between breaths, was too close. Caden nodded, checking that their precious cargo remained intact. But effective. Your knowledge of the local flora saved us. Your throwing arm didn't hurt either, she acknowledged with the ghost of a smile. We make a decent team. We do, he agreed, something warming in his voice that went beyond the immediate victory of their escape. They resumed their journey at a